Devin Booker reportedly back on Wednesday against the Minnesota Timberwolves. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, what's real and not real from the stretch without the Suns' best player, and what can we expect when he gets back? Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen. Here on this Wednesday, another Suns game night against the Minnesota Timberwolves. If you're finding us for the first time or just have not done so already, go ahead and hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you're finding the show. We are free and available everywhere you get podcasts, including YouTube. So just hit that button, get this show in your feed Monday through Friday through the rest of the season. Become an everydayer and get locked onto the Suns right along with me and thousands of other listeners and watchers every single day. Joining us to break down what's been real and not real about a strange first 10 games for the Phoenix Suns is Stephen PridGeon, who I'm happy to have back. I think he was on right before the season started, does great work at Bright Side of the Sun. You probably have seen his videos and breakdowns on Twitter, and he's the perfect guy to answer that very basic question of what is real and what is not real from the open of the season for Phoenix. I want to tell everybody as well that today's show is brought to you by Ibotta and eBay Motors. We'll hear more about them later on in the show. But Stephen, let me just take the first thing that comes off of the top of your head. First thing that comes to mind when you think about what is legit about what we've seen from Phoenix to open the season. That can be a good thing or a bad thing. I'll let you kick us off.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is even with the many pieces that are new in the mix, from players to coaches, to the court and jerseys and logos, all of that stuff.
True.
It's so much newness that it's inevitable that there's going to be an ingratiation period. So the word that comes to mind first for me is identity. They're not in an identity crisis, but they are in search for what their true identity is. And again, that's inevitable when you have so many new pieces trying to ingratiate themselves with each other.
It is, and I think, well, let me ask you, what do you think? What did you expect their identity to be, or what do you expect their identity to be? Because, I mean, I think a lot of us are pretty sure they're going to be a better offensive team than defense, and there's certain ways that I think they want to play on offense that maybe we have seen some of, but what do you think they want to be, and how close are they?
So offensively speaking, I do think that this will be a top 3 team offensively in terms of statistical production on a points per possession basis and with efficiencies, specifically in the half court and things of that nature. They have 3 of the top 20 offensive pieces, however you want to rank it, however you want to slice it, excuse me. And it's just inevitable that they're going to be a top flight offensive team. So that's going to take care of itself once they get the 3 main pieces in rotation together and building chemistry. And things will trickle down from that offensively from the ancillary players as well. Defensively is where things get a little tricky. I projected that they would be a top 12 defense. I think that, first of all, the pedigree that precedes Frank Vogel, as well as David Fizdale, from his Heat guys and things of that nature, this automatically lends itself to them being a well-coached and even past well-coached, well-prepared team. That was something that they were under Monty Williams, and that's not going to change. It might take maybe even another step forward under the tutelage and coaching staff built by Frank Vogel. Now, when you're talking about schemes and things like that, that's where I think their identity still is going to have to get built out. Obviously, Nurkic is a player that's not the most agile and things like that, so they're going to be a little bit more conservative from the back line. But from the front line, in terms of the guards and the wings that are on the ball, they have to be more aggressive. And I think that's where they've been in limbo at times, especially in the waning moments of games. And we've kind of seen that that imbalance kind of playing out over the last 2 games, especially.
Yeah, I think that's all great stuff. I wanted to point at 2 things that I haven't been able to talk about that I think highlights what you're saying, which is, well, it's the same thing, but it's on offense and defense that it's showing up. And when they hired Vogel, once we saw what the roster was going to look like, maybe I changed my expectations a bit when we saw the Ayton trade, but in the NBA right now, I mean, it's always been the case, but I think we're kind of heading back in this direction after a long time where maybe jump shooting and the Warriors and the Rockets and those types of teams maybe changed our view on this, even that Raptors team. You have to win in the paint. You have to win at the rim. And the best teams in the league are doing that. The champions of the past few years are doing that. Even, the Warriors winning it in 2022, like Wiggins took a big step forward as an offensive rebounder, as an attacker, these types of things. Even Curry creating an isolation more often, and that team looked a little different than the Splash Brothers days. And the Suns have not done that this year. I'm looking on offense in terms of rim frequency. They are 17th in defense in terms of rim frequency. They are allowing the 9th most percentage of opponent field goal attempts to come there. And, the accuracy can kind of fluctuate, but the Suns are also 23rd in rim accuracy defensively. They're allowing teams to finish at a high level. So opponents are getting to the basket, finishing, and the Suns aren't matching that. So you can look at free throw attempts, and they're taking threes, games like the Utah game at the beginning of the year and other moments where they've really gotten downhill, turning defense into offense. And those are some of the things I think identity-wise that we knew Vogel would want to instill. But if they're a bottom 10 team on both ends of the court in terms of controlling the rim, they're not going to be a great team. And, I'm not saying that's going to be permanent. I think offensively that's somewhere Booker will help, of course, and he's taken big strides the past 2 seasons, becoming more of a threat and somebody that can create openings by doing that in transition and in the half court. But the other guys I'm worried about, I don't think anyone else necessarily besides Beal has shown that they're going to be that type of guy offensively. And then defensively, like, we knew that was going to be a weakness, but I think the aggressiveness in terms of point of attack and help can just prevent those drives from ever getting to the rim more often than they are. So I don't know if there's anything you've seen that's contributing maybe on the defensive end to why that hasn't happened. Do you think it's just building the habits and finding the right personnel? Because I do want to get to the kind of the rotation and personnel piece in the next segment, but what are you seeing that's preventing them from stopping Shea from getting inside? I mean, he's great, but as one example, or looking ahead, Anthony Edwards going to be another nightmare there that's just allowing these opponents to eat inside.
Yeah, well, I think the important thing is to preface it with the abundance of on-ball creators and the multitude of abundances that they can get to their bag. That has to be prefaced because that's not easy to stop or even mitigate to a certain extent. Shea is arguably the best driver of basketball in the NBA. You might want to throw Giannis in there, but on volume, Shea was the best last season. So I think in terms of going into this season, you have to take that into account. And just kind of looking at the last 2 games as an example, you look at LeBron James. He had a big-time fourth quarter. What can't you say that hasn't already been regurgitated a billion times about LeBron? He's the best driver of all time. So you add that context to it. That should – I'm not going to say it makes it excusable, but it's understandable why you might not be able to stop 2 players of that ilk. Nonetheless, and obviously, like you said, Anthony Edwards is on the way tomorrow. Nonetheless, there's things that you can do and you can control that make things harder for them, which is ultimately what the goal is. You're not going to stop them for 48 minutes. It's just how much can you make them work for it and how much of the stuff that they really like to get to can you mitigate. And you can't do those things when this is Sans, Jordan Goodwin, and Sans, of course, Josh Okogie. You can't direct and dictate defensively if you're not getting into the ball. And again, sans those 2, there's no other perimeter defenders on the Suns right now that are consistently getting into the hip of ball handlers and steering the wheel. You're not necessarily going to dictate exactly where they're going to go, but you can dictate the pace at which they're getting there. And if you know, say you're doing late switches like they were with the Lakers and with the Thunder, with Shea and LeBron in the fourth quarter, you can get them quicker to that late switch than they want to get to, and that's going to speed up the timing of their reads. They might not make a pass to that skip to the opposite corner that's going to stretch your rotations. You keep your defensive shell intact, and you're bleeding away precious moments off the shot clock in addition to all of that. And again, Okogie and Jordan Goodwin weren't even on the floor for most of those minutes, obviously because of what they can't contribute offensively.
Yeah.
So that's going to be, like you mentioned, something that's going to be a piece for the Suns to work out in terms of layers within their rotation and figure out what they can do in those moments. And I feel like that's a lot of what we've seen, in addition to just the lack of chemistry within the scheme as well.
Yeah, let's hit on a specific player within some of what you're talking about on a perimeter defense standpoint and sort of how he contributes to the rotation and the ripple effects of who plays with who and when and all those good things as this team finally, hopefully, starts to settle in starting Wednesday night against the Minnesota Timberwolves. That player is Bradley Beal, who we'll get to next. First, today's show brought to you by eBay Motors. Thrilled to be providing you with our eBay Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week all year long from our wonderful Locked On Fantasy Basketball host, Josh Lloyd. Brandon Miller has been starting for the Charlotte Hornets with Terry Rozier out. Dylan Brooks playing like an all-star early on for a top 10 offense and defense in Houston, making all of his threes, it feels like, and stopping and getting steals defensively. Bismack Biyombo, we know him in Phoenix, out in Memphis with their center troubles, is playing a huge role and contributing under the radar. Denny Avdia in Washington just got a contract extension and is shooting the ball at a really high level. Jordan Hawkins out in New Orleans, another under the radar, a rookie who has stepped into a big role, starting oftentimes for New Orleans, and a knockdown shooter right from the jump. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship. eBay Motors knows the championship team is about each player being a perfect fit, and it's the same with your vehicle. I personally have shopped at eBay Motors for a wheel cover for my front wheel. It just fell off on the way actually to a Suns game a few months back. Also, the sunshade flap with the mirror that goes in front of the driver's side because, of course, the sun destroys us here in Phoenix, and I needed that. It's little stuff, but I found it at eBay Motors for far and away the best price that I could get it anywhere. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly with eBay Motors. Brake kits, LED lights, roof rack, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. You put your car in, you list out what is the make and model and trim of your vehicle, and eBay gives you a check mark to say this one will work. Plus, at those prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, rolling it through here with Stephen PridGeon, Bright Side of the Sun. We're going to talk through the personnel side of things. We got through some of the scheme of what's been real and not real, worrisome and not worrisome as it relates to the first 10 games for the Phoenix Suns. And let's go to Beal, Stephen, because you talked about the perimeter defense, and it's probably the number one thing I want to be patient with as far as his recovery and continued dealing with the back goes, because obviously defense is a lot about, and when you're talking about, getting into the ball and playing physically and just staying with great players who he's having to guard more than maybe you would like, a lot of that is going to just be, are you physically up for that? Can you give your full energy? So that kind of said, that caveat out of the way, even against a guy like Kobe White, I was a little worried watching how quickly and easily White was able to get into the teeth of the defense when Beal was guarding him. And some of that's coverage, and we know the Suns are going to try to make up for their perimeter defensive disadvantages at times by, sending guys the direction that they want, sending them to the baseline, helping aggressively. Even what we saw with LeBron, where by the end of the game, Nurkic is like guarding Cam Reddish and just actually standing at the basket, and Reddish gets those open threes. They're going to do things like that, but even with that all said, and with the injury stuff, I have been a little worried about Beal's defense to start, and I want it to get better. I think it will get better when he's healthy, but I think it's just a reminder of kind of what the Suns are dealing with from a personnel standpoint, that their best players, who defense might not be the number one thing you would ask from them are having to do a lot.
Yeah, I think you said it extremely well. I only had such a level of expectation for Beal defensively. Just kind of watching him over the years, and even more so watching this film from last season after the trade went through and everything. He has a ceiling, and it's not gonna come from him containing the ball 1v1. That's not his calling card defensively. He has moments where he's good with his anticipatory skill and is solid with his positioning, but the majority of optimizing Bradley Beal is going to come from using him as a rotational defender. So, for example, if the Suns lean more into an aggressive identity defensively, that might put Bradley Beal in positions to be more successful defensively as well, because more often than not, he's not going to be the player that's going to be tasked with navigating screens, which is not a strength of his. So if he is used on the help side, on the weak side, as they zone up, as they put two to the ball, or just put even a slight bit more pressure on the ball in those scenarios, that's going to allow for him to get out in rotations and close out and recover and things like that. And we saw examples of that against, I think, the Lakers, where he was able to get a nice closeout on might have been Taurean Prince, and he was able to do it astutely, not closing out all the way to the line, and then ultimately closing the airspace, and then being able to get like a little bit of a deflection and then win the possession for the Suns to get back on offense. Like little things like that are where he shows that he's usually on schedule or even sometimes a bit early, and that's equally defense as much as playing 1v1. So you can take the famine with the feast being what his strengths are defensively, and I think putting him in those positions will optimize the Suns' defense a little bit more.
So 2 questions off of that. One, how much do you think they can count on Booker to be part of the solution as a point of attack guy, navigating those screens, maybe being the smaller player as they send 2 to the ball off of a pick and roll, things like that? And 2, it sounds like you're maybe leaning toward something I think Suns fans are debating right now. It sounds like you think that they need to have quite a bit of minutes where at least one of Okogie and Goodwin are out there even once Booker comes back. So I guess both of those are I want to hear your thoughts on.
For sure. Well, we can start with Booker, do it in the order you asked. So Devin is, in my opinion, he's a slightly above average defender, which I think is underrated by many. In terms of people who don't watch the Suns consistently, they think he's like a turnstile or a revolving door, which couldn't be any further from the truth. And if you watch them in the playoffs last season, especially in the first round against the Clippers, there's no way you could possibly have that type of mindset on what type of defender he is. And that's a whole nother topic in and of itself there. But I think that Book is a very underrated, and I was just speaking on the ball. Book is underrated as a rotational defender as well. The Suns have had a handful of reps over the last, 3-4 seasons now, especially in the playoffs, where he's been in those scenarios where he's having to X out with guys and communicate who's a low man, step over to sink and fill, and do all of these little intricacies to keep the defensive shell intact. He's excelled at, from watching the film of him, at a handful of those scenarios. So I don't think that there's nothing in this new rendition that he won't be that he'll be tasked with that he hasn't shown that he could do in a sustainable manner at an above average level. So just kind of looking at that with him, it's all just a matter of how much energy he's exerting. Because we see when he's fresh and his legs are fresh and they're underneath him, he's flying around getting steals from second side and jumping passing lanes and doing all the little things that you would need from a rotational defender, and also flashing his very underrated athleticism in the process. And then kind of looking at your second question with Okogie and Goodwin, yes, I was saying in the beginning of the season, even in the preseason, that my operation process-wise was that they should have at least one of those 2 on the floor at all times to optimize the other pieces defensively. You have one elite point of attack guy. You have another guy who's very much up and coming in terms of his activity. Goodwin has a little bit more of an issue with fouls, but when his minutes are being mitigated the way they are, the foul issue is not nearly as much of an issue as if he was playing 20 to 25 minutes a game. Now, figuring out how to use those pieces within the construct offensively is another thing, but the value they bring is defense. And letting your guys that are the most valuable on the defensive side do what they do, especially at the point of attack, for a defense that needs to keep its shell intact and keep people away from driving at Nurkic and Eubanks, you can't do a better job than having those two tasked with guarding Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, like we saw against the Thunder in their most recent game. And obviously Shai did his thing, but I would say that those two, and those were the two players that were tasked with guarding them, made life tough on him. We saw a handful of times where Koji was just sitting in his chair defensively and just keeping his chest in front of Shai as he got into his movement patterns offensively, and he was able to flatten out a lot of his isolation attacks, even in pick and roll. And we saw a little bit of the same with Goodwin. And then when the ball would leave Shai's hand, now they become help defenders. Now they're jumping passing lanes, directing traffic, and things like that. So you have to have those pieces that do bring value defensively baked into your rotation, regardless of what they're giving on offense.
I don't love the lineups where both are in there. I think it hurts the offense too much.
And I'll say this before you finish that. I did ask Frank Vogel about that in Detroit. Yeah. And he said ideally you won't see too much of those two on the floor at the same time, but obviously given the injuries, you kind of had to. So I think now with the team officially being fully intact, now is where you can start layering it to where it's one or the other and never both. I do think what you're getting to is correct.
Yeah, fully intact, but now I'm a little nervous about Eric Gordon. We'll have to see what that looks like. But so okay, we're in agreement there. I guess I'm leaning Goodwin, even though I agree with you that the lack of experience compared to Okogie, I think Okogie's a little bit stronger, has a lower center of gravity, and can kind of barricade the directional stuff that a savvy guard is trying to do to you, maybe more than Goodwin. I think they're close enough that I think the offense, to me, both as a passer and as a three-point shooter, I would just say commit to Goodwin and hope it works. And I know that might be politically weird with the difference in experience and all that, but that would be my vote. Besides that, though, who do you think, if I were to just say, give me your 9 guys that should be playing, assuming Booker's back, or even it can be 10, whatever. Booker's back. Let's just say when, hopefully this Gordon thing is not anything significant and he's healthy too. What is your optimal kind of 9-10 man rotation with all these things we've been talking about kind of factored in?
Gotcha. So obviously start at the top. We got Booker, Durant, Beal, Nurkic, Eubanks, Base Diop, Gordon, Watanabe, Okogie, and honestly, I'm solid there. I don't know if I'm omitting a name. I don't think I'm omitting anybody that I didn't want to.
No, I think you got everybody. It would just be like Little, Goodwin. Those are the guys you left out, but somebody has to go.
I'm at that 9, and Goodwin is on the fringe for me. I do, obviously, like I just mentioned, love what he brings defensively, and I feel like that's important. But I feel like you can kind of teeter that based off of what the matchups are. So, for example, if you have an elite guard that you're going against like SGA, then cool, you probably want to give him more minutes than you typically would. Same thing with Okogie to an extent. But if you're going against a team like the Lakers, where it's Austin Reeves is very good, D'Angelo Russell is very good, I don't feel like there's as much of a need. You should be able to get away with Grayson Allen chipping in with his physicality and activity more than you need somebody that's more so elite at that point of attack stuff, screen navigation, picking up the ball full court, directionality, all of those things.
All right, I like it. Let's go to specifics on Booker returning Wednesday night, what he brings, what we should be watching for. What did we see from Booker in the 2 games that he did play, even if, they were fleeting? We'll get into all that next. First, today's show brought to you by Ibotta. Turkey is great, but we all know the best part of Thanksgiving dinner is the sides. And with Ibotta, you can make sure you get the whole family's favorite side dishes and the turkey, all while getting cash back straight into your pocket. Here's what I mean. Starting November 1st, for the 4th year in a row, Ibotta is giving 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving feast. Just add the offers you use in the app to redeem for everything you need to make your Thanksgiving feast complete. All you have to do is shop at your favorite retailers, upload those receipts, and Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, in addition, of course, to the Thanksgiving ones I just mentioned, from produce to personal care to pantry goods, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much. With Ibotta, though, you get real cash back that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. You can also earn Cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers when you start with Ibotta, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Download the Ibotta app now. Use the code LOCKED to get 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving dinner starting November 1st. That's a full match. It's not what they normally do, so take advantage. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store, download the free Ibotta app, and use the code LOCKED when you do. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store. Promo code LOCKED. All right, let's close it out, Steven. I'll just set the stuff aside that we can't know the answer to, which is Booker actually fully healthy? Is this the right timeline? I can't help but wonder some of that now that we're 2 seasons into some early returns and re-aggravations and different things that are happening to his body. It's just, I want to say it, but I don't have much to add, but there we go. Other than that, let's start there with what we did see from him when he has been healthy, because I think the control of the game, the timing, the patience, a lot of that stuff felt like it got another 5-10% better just in terms of his manipulation of the defense as a playmaker, even than what we were seeing last year. Maybe that sounds crazy to say based on what he did in the playoffs, but it's one of those things that it feels like you can just sort of feel when you're watching somebody at the peak of their powers, and keeping turnovers low, which he didn't necessarily do in those games. All those things kind of show it, but I think we all watched that guy and felt like, okay, if he's healthy again, if he can kind of have the tools around him that he does, like this could be yet another level up. What did you see against Golden State and San Antonio in his 2 games this year? What did you see?
Well, I saw a player that, like you mentioned, has taken multiple steps in controlling the game. Chris Paul gets a lot of all-time level credit for his ability to manipulate anything he wants, whether that be for himself or for others, and especially when he's putting forth his scoring prowess and he's blending that together. Devin Booker has had to kind of do it in a different way, but he learned so much, in my opinion, from not just playing with Chris, but the conversations and watching film and all that stuff that they said they did together. It was really just playing out in real time in the playoffs last season, and even more so in these 2 games to start this season. You can look at the game against the Golden State Warriors as a prime example. In that 4th quarter, he scored a few points, but he generated a lot more off of the scoring gravity that he generates just by moving around, going off of screens and reading and reacting off of the defense, getting to certain pockets, knowing that the defense is going to help this way, and countering with the great pass across the court and things like that. His just general feel for the game is at a different level, and it hits different saying that about Devin Booker, because we know he already had all of that in terms of feel as a scorer. That's never been an issue, and even more so the last couple of seasons, he's added that feel on volume from deep, which is really just rounding out his game even more. But the depths of strides that he's taking in terms of playmaking and doing it on a high volume, literally on a possession by possession basis, now being a point guard for the team, you can't say enough about how he's pulling strings and just processing things in real time and reacting off of that, and keeping not just himself, but again, Suns players in their optimized positions to play off of closeouts, play and catch and shoot, to get wide open looks. He's special. And even through just these 2 games, he's at 1.11 points per possession, which is ranked in the 79th percentile at the moment. But if you squeeze that and you take out a lot of the other stuff and you just add the players that are high volume in pick and rolls, including passes, so players like Tyrese Halliburton, Trae Young, Jalen Brunson, players of that ilk, Devin Booker is literally, by my estimation, just looking at the numbers, he was 3rd when looking at all of the numbers comprehensively. So the points he's scoring for himself, the efficiency with that, the points scored for others, the efficiency with that, and the turnover percentage, and just the general efficiency. He's arguably the best point guard in terms of pick and roll play that can blend in not just playmaking but also scoring. Now, obviously, we know Trae Young does a lot of that as well on volume, but I don't know, man. I just feel like Devin Booker is taking it to such a different level that he's in that ilk of playmakers out of the pick and roll at this point in his career.
Yeah, I mean, Great stuff. I agree with you. I guess you would maybe say Luka, but I don't know what you call how he runs the pick and roll. It sometimes doesn't feel like you would call it a pick and roll necessarily. And I don't know if the numbers back that up, I guess, just to throw another name out there. But I think the question on Suns fans' minds is the fourth quarter, the structure. How does Booker's control, like we're talking about, lift up what's been a little bit of a frustrating process, or maybe, I guess, hierarchy late in these games? And one thing I'll give you credit for, too, the last time we talked, is your optimism about Beal's ability to fit into what they were doing as an off-ball player. I've been pretty interested in the fact that they haven't overdone it in terms of kind of, okay, we have Beal back. He's our primary initiator every single time down the court now because we're so desperate to win these games and get back on track and all that. They've sort of kept him in the same role he will be in, even though at times it's maybe Kevin Durant or it's Grayson Allen initiating stuff and having him, attack a rotating defense or come off of a pin down and, things like that we know he will do once it's Booker handling those possessions. So that's been cool to see that they're so optimistic about that fit that they just want to build that up right away, and they felt good about Booker coming back soon enough that they could play it patiently. What do you think needs to change, can change late in these games when Booker does come back? We'll close out there because I expect Minnesota to be a pretty tall challenge tonight. I wouldn't be surprised if this game goes down to the wire. They have their own one-on-one creator, and they've been playing together now for 10 games where the Suns have not. I think it'll be another game that could test them. What do you want to see improve? Understanding it's just the first game for him back, but what do you want to see improve in those fourth quarters for them to at least take a step forward, if not win the game?
Well, stability is the first thing that comes to mind for me when you speak to Devin Booker returning to the lineup. He puts everybody else back in their most optimized position. And so talk about Bradley Beal being back in the mix as well. Bradley Beal obviously can do a ton of things at an elite level with the ball in his hands. I think, like I mentioned in our last pod, I feel like some of the things that he's going to bring that are most effective are going to be his off-ball activity. And we saw a lot of that in that game against Chicago. He scored, I don't know how many points in the first quarter on the second side of a primary action, and that was without Devin Booker. So you add that dynamic, that's a huge dynamic to all of that, and just the ways that we talked about that he can control the game, that optimizes Beal, that also optimizes Durant, that puts defenses in a situation to where they literally just cannot be right or be correct in any decision that they make when those three are sharing the floor between those two and Kevin Durant. You talk about Durant's post touches. If you got Devin Booker that's one pass away, will it send a double team? I don't know. There's going to be some harsh consequences to pay for that. If you decide to send it from the baseline where, say, Nurkic might be in the opposite dunker spot, okay, that's going to open up a pocket for Durant to hit that skip pass, and that's going to stretch the rotations. And say that third player that's on the floor with them on the wing is Eric Gordon, for example. There's just, or maybe Yuta Watanabe, or maybe it's KBD. These players are all showing that they can knock down those wide open looks when they're given the opportunity to. And again, there's just no way for a defense to be right. So just seeing the stability that Devin Booker brings in that dynamic and how it facilitates literally and figuratively to everybody else being optimized on the floor. He's like the big chess piece. He's the king piece on the board. And once you put him back in the mix, now the queen and everything else trickles down in terms of where it is being optimized. And I think that's just literally what we're going to see, even without him being at his full self right away. Just the fact that he'll be back and on the court is going to just really going to help this team, man. It's funny to say that about the best player. Having your best player back is going to help. Surprise.
It is one of those things. It's been the, I guess, the key to remember as we're watching all these weird losses and frustrating moments where it's like it might not feel like it should be the case when you also have Kevin Durant or Bradley Beal coming back, but I mean, even the best teams, if you take the head of the snake off, they're not as effective. So I'll admit I've had some panic moments. I've had some some worry. But I mean, I even just hearing you say that and thinking back to Okogie, like some of the habits that need to be built in terms of how these guys play off of the best, the big three have been impossible to get reps on, because whatever Okogie might have had to be doing, or anybody has had to be doing when it's a KD post up with questionable spacing and the defense selling out, that's just so different from what that role is going to have to be when it's, a Booker Durant pick and roll, or, a pin down for Booker with Nurkic and Durant as screeners, and, suddenly Rudy Gobert's out on the perimeter and there's wide open space. Like, all these things are, what is Okogie doing in the weak side now, or what are these other guys focused on in that situation? We just haven't gotten to see it. They haven't gotten to experience it. So it should be exciting to see kind of day one of that, and finally feel like we're getting a taste of what this team's going to be like, and get to enjoy these games hopefully a little more. But a big thank you, Stephen, for joining us. You can read his work over at Bright Side of the Sun. Follow him at Twitter. That's on the screen. Over on YouTube, I'll put the link to his work in the show description, of course, as well, if you're listening on audio. And recap show tonight, guys, after the Wolves game, and Aaron Edwards to close out the week. Don't forget to sign up for the Locked On Suns Insider text alerts, as well as the TikTok instant reaction game recap videos and more content there. All that will be pumped out all year long. Hopefully you guys are looking forward to that extra content this season, and I'll talk to you guys tonight.